Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Ryuijie.
These days, I have three bodies of work that I sort of rotate during the course of the year. One are these color botanicals, which I started in about 2000, but those were all black and white. They were split-tone black and white prints, and they were all silver gelatin. And then about 2.5 years ago, I started doing them in color, and that was my transition into digital capture and digital printing. So I do that, and then the P-squares are... It's sort of a transition from my first platinum prints. I was doing gelatin silver since about 1975. Just your traditional West Coast landscape work, large format, 4x5. And then in 1990, I was teaching with the Josephus Daniels Gallery in Carmel. And we used to do this thing called the Turkey Workshop during Thanksgiving. And one of the demonstrations that we had that during the first one was the Platinum Palladium demonstration by a friend of mine, Harry Olson. And at that point, I just fell in love with it. And that's what I've been printing ever since then. And my first 10 years or so were spent just doing contact prints from my 4x5. The P-squares and these Kanchi prints, they sort of evolved as photography started to change, you know. You call up one day and you want copy film and there is none. So people were starting to make digital negatives. Just kind of leaving the 4x5 behind, I continued using film and making these square prints. And the first ones were from a Rolly, from a SL66, and they were enlarged, but they were enlarged digitally. Now I'm using a Mamiya, and every once in a while I'll try a negative from digital capture, but I'm having a little bit of issue with it. For some reason the curves don't work quite the same. And the other work on the wall here, these are the underwater prints, the Kanchi prints. And Kanchi means, in Japanese, it means a quiet place. That was started in 2007. I work with another photographer. She's also a diver. She's a dive master, keeps me safe. You know, I should just open it up to questions about any of this.
What type of camera are you shooting with underwater?
I'm using film, so I have half a dozen Iconis cameras, old Nikons. I think they discontinued those somewhere around the early 90s, but you can find them on eBay. They're really cheap now.
35 millimeter?
Yeah, they're 35 millimeter. The thing about them is that they probably had the best optics that were ever designed for underwater work. They don't work out of the water. It's a water contact optic, so even the viewfinder, you can't see anything unless you're in the water. But they're beautiful Nikkor lenses. And then I have a couple that are housed. I have a couple of Nikons in housings. Sometimes it's nice to have the zoom on there, although for travel or something, they're kind of bulky.
I'm curious about the wonderful grain in there.
That's HP5. I process for about 20 minutes in D23. Yeah, to get the grain, and some of it's noise, since we're working digitally to make the negative. Yeah, some of it is noise from contrast changes. Underwater, there's just no contrast at all. Adjusting the negatives in Photoshop is a nice benefit. All my original 4x5s, well, there's not much you could do with them. You know, you could bleach them a little bit in the darkroom if they were a little too flat. Platinum requires a very specific negative, especially if you're working, say, with palladium more than platinum, because its Dmax is much lower, so unless the negative is perfect in highlights and shadows, they tend to solarize. Well, like in a silver print, you can keep giving it light and light from the darkroom and larger, and the black's never really getting blacker. You know, they reach a certain point and then that's it. But in a platinum palladium print, if you give it too much light, and we're talking about ultraviolet, the tone will reverse and it'll solarize. So you need a negative that'll print at a given time where the highlights are nice and the shadows are nice without, going over that Dmax curve. Most of these, the Kanchi ones are done with a process called Na2, which is, rather than using potassium chloroplatinate, we use sodium. That acts as a contrast agent with the palladium. The P-squares, those are all done using a traditional ABC formula, which incorporates a lot of platinum as opposed to the palladium. So you'll find they're sharper. The blacks are blacker. There's a higher contrast range.
So can you tell us your process a little bit?
Yeah, I'm photographing underwater with film. I processed it for a long time to get the graininess.
Okay.
Yeah, which was something that I've always wanted to do, but just never did because it was I just thought that people wouldn't recognize me, if I started doing all my landscapes in this big chunky grain. So, but this came along. The light underwater is just really unusual, and that a lot of times you can actually see it, as it passes through the water. Anyway, it's the film is scanned, run through Photoshop, and then a negative is made using an inkjet printer, and then taken in the darkroom. The paper's hand-coated and then contact printed. Well, the chemistry is easy to get, although the platinum's becoming more and more expensive. Papers are still, they come and go, so they're hard to find. The Kanchi are printed on arches, platine, because I use a brush. The P-squares are on Crane's 90-pound cover, which is no longer available. They were asked to remove certain chemicals from the paper, so it's no longer printed. But I got together with a few of my friends, and we bought out their old stock. So we bought about 10,000 sheets of old stock.
Just curious about your chalk that you put on.
Oh, yeah, that has the title of the work, which is Kanchi, and then it's my name and Camille's name.
On your inspiration, do you work mostly intuitively, or do you have certain ideas that you have in mind?
Sometimes I have some ideas in mind, but most of it's intuitive. I mean, landscapes, you pick a location and walk around, and a lot of it depends on light. But yeah, most of it's intuitive. And right now I'm not doing a lot of the landscape work. I'm working, it's the time of the year. I'm working on florals right now, since things are blooming. And as far as the underwater, it's a matter of conditions. It hasn't been very good for the last 2-3 weeks, but yesterday was a beautiful day. It was very calm and visibility was good.
How do you freeze your flowers?
Just in my refrigerator. I have an 11 by 14 stainless steel tray, and I just arrange them in there, pour water into it. I use a little bit of flow to break down the water surface tension, because you know how water beads up on leaves and things like that, and they tend to float. So that seems to help a lot. And it takes about it's over a gallon of water, so it takes about a day, a little more. Hopefully something comes out of it.
How do you light them?
I backlight them. When I was using the 4x5, I would use a strobe and with push, but I'd pull the slide out. We're completely in the dark, and I'd pull the slide out, and I'd hit the strobe maybe once or twice, depending on what I thought I needed, and then put the slide back in, close the lens. But now, since I'm doing digital capture, I'm just using a color-corrected lamp. You sort of lose the transparency in that if you start to put the light on its surface, because I want the light coming through the back. So the subject matter is kind of limited. I mean, things like roses and orchids, they're just too much opacity in them. The light won't pass through. You basically get shadow, silhouettes. And I've tried freezing other things. I did some shrimp and calamari and stuff like that very early on. I've been freezing things and photographing them since around 2000.
What inspirations, sort of foundations for how you developed in your career? I mean, what got you excited and what kept you excited?
I think the first photographs that I remember were Jerry Oldsman's. What I really liked was the printing. There was so much detail, and it was just gorgeous. That's when I started black and white photography.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.